They called me crazy when I said I'd drain their $1 million lake. You can't touch us, the HOA president laughed, standing in her white Tesla beside her $1.8 million lakeside resort. We have lawyers, we have money, and we have power. 3 months later, I'm watching her precious resort sitting in a muddy crater while expensive boats lie tilted like broken toys in what used to be crystal clear water. The sound of my boots crunching on the dried lakebed echoes where luxury yachts once hummed. She thought she could steamroll a retired military engineer, thought she could destroy the hand-built stone bridge my grandfather constructed during the Great Depression, the same bridge where 3 generations of my family proposed marriage, including me to my late wife Sarah. What this corporate shark from Connecticut never bothered to research was simple. I didn't just inherit a cabin by her lake, I inherited the dam that created it. What would you do if your HOA destroyed your family's most sacred memory? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Garrett Donovan, and I'm 52 years old with calloused hands that know the difference between honest work and corporate bullshit. After 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers building bridges in Iraq and Afghanistan, then another decade in private construction, I thought I'd earned some peace. When my grandfather passed in 2019, he left me his sanctuary, a 1940s fishing cabin on 200 feet of pristine Lake Thornfield shoreline, complete with something money can't buy, a hand-built stone bridge connecting our cabin to the fishing dock. Every morning I hear those weathered wooden planks creak under my boots, the same sound that greeted my grandfather for 60 years as he crossed to check his nets. The bridge witnessed my father proposing to my mother in 1967, and later my own nervous proposal to Sarah in 1998, autumn leaves dancing on the water below us like nature's confetti. After Sarah's 3-year battle with cancer ended last year, that bridge became my daily pilgrimage, the only place where I could still feel the warmth of 3 generations of love. Lake Thornfield tells upstate New York's story in miniature. 400 acres of natural beauty host weathered family cabins built by blue-collar hands in the 50s, now neighbors to gleaming McMansions sprouting like invasive species after tech money discovered our hidden paradise. The old-timers understood lake etiquette. Walt Henderson, a Vietnam vet whose Purple Heart sits next to his coffee pot, fixes everyone's boat engines for free. Eleanor Murphy shares vegetables from her lakeside garden and bakes cookies that smell like childhood summers. We fish together, share tools, and mind our own business while pine needles crunch underfoot and cedar smoke drifts from our chimneys. Then 2019 brought the Thornfield Estates development, and with it came Vivian Blackwood like a plague wrapped in white linen. 45, recently divorced from hedge fund millions, armed with a real estate law degree and entitlement that could choke a horse. Her $2.3 million glass palace contained more marble than a Roman museum, strategically positioned to loom over us peasants like a corporate Death Star. Vivian surveyed our lake through designer sunglasses the way Sherman studied Atlanta, calculating what needed burning. Our first encounter happened at Murphy's Country Store, where she stood ahead of me complaining about aesthetic inconsistencies to poor Betty behind the counter. Her white Tesla Model X sat outside like a spaceship that had crash-landed in 1955, while she gestured with manicured nails about property values and community standards. When she turned and spotted my Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots, her smile turned plastic enough to float. "You must be one of our charming local residents," she purred, pronouncing charming like a diagnosis. 6 months later, Vivian's beautification campaign launched with military precision. Her hit list targeted Walt's 30-year-old base boat, maritime eyesore, Eleanor's vegetable garden, agricultural inappropriateness, and my grandfather's bridge, structurally questionable and aesthetically incompatible. The certified violation notice arrived like a court summons, official letterhead screaming authority she hadn't earned. I marched to her marble fortress with my grandfather's 1943 building permits and county surveys. "Mr. Donovan," she said, opening her door with theatrical patience, "that rustic structure simply doesn't align with our elevated community vision. We're curating a luxury experience, not operating a fishing camp." The scent of expensive candles and legal intimidation filled her foyer as I spread historical documents across her imported Italian countertop. This bridge predated her HOA by 70 years, I explained, legally grandfathered, historically protected, and absolutely none of her business. Vivian's response was a smile sharp enough to gut fish. How delightfully naive. The community has voted, Mr. Donovan, and democracy is such a beautiful thing when it serves progress. Her fingers drummed against marble like a countdown timer. 30 days to comply, or we'll explore more creative enforcement options. Standing there in her temple of imported superiority, I realized this woman had just declared war on the wrong engineer. Vivian wasted no time turning her threat into action. 3 days after our marble countertop confrontation, she called an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday when most working folks couldn't attend. The venue? Her own living room, naturally, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake like a corporate boardroom designed to intimidate. When I arrived, the smell of expensive coffee and fresh pastries couldn't mask the stench of a rigged game. She'd packed the room with her cronies from Thornfield Estates, 6 families who'd moved in during the past 2 years, all driving cars that cost more than my annual pension. The old-timers were outnumbered, just me, Walt, and Eleanor facing down Vivian's hand-picked jury. On her glass coffee table sat a manila folder thick enough to choke a goat, labeled Bridge Safety Assessment in bold red letters. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Vivian began, her voice dripping fake concern. "We have a serious liability issue that requires immediate action." She opened the folder like a prosecutor presenting murder evidence. "This professional structural assessment confirms our worst fears about Mr. Donovan's bridge. The liability exposure to our community is simply unacceptable." I leaned forward to examine her so-called professional assessment. The letterhead read, Blackwood Construction Consulting, her brother-in-law's company from Connecticut. The evaluation was 3 pages of technical-sounding nonsense about structural degradation and imminent collapse risk, complete with grainy photos that made my grandfather's solid stonework look like a house of cards. 20 years of reviewing military engineering reports had taught me to spot bullshit wrapped in official language, and this stank worse than a latrine in August. "This assessment is fraudulent," I said, my military directness cutting through her corporate theater. "Your brother-in-law has never set foot on my property, and this bridge has survived 70 years of upstate winters. It'll outlast half the McMansions around this lake." Vivian's smile turned predatory. "Mr. Donovan, personal attacks won't change the facts. The community's safety must come first." She gestured to her audience like a game show host revealing prizes. "All in favor of requiring immediate bridge removal to protect our shared property values and personal safety?" 7 hands shot up faster than a Marine Corps salute. The vote wasn't even close. 7-3 for demolition, with a 30-day compliance deadline and $500 daily fines until I surrendered. Eleanor whispered, "I'm sorry, honey," as the gavel fell on 70 years of family history. But here's where Vivian made her first crucial mistake. She underestimated a military engineer's research skills. While she celebrated her victory with champagne and self-congratulation, I spent the next week camped at the county courthouse, digging through filing cabinets older than disco music. The musty smell of deteriorating paper and forgotten battles filled my nostrils as I searched for ammunition. My father had always told me that property disputes were won in dusty file rooms, not fancy boardrooms, and I remembered his advice about checking every document twice before accepting defeat. The breakthrough came buried in a 1943 county survey map, yellowed with age but crystal clear in its implications. My grandfather's bridge sat squarely on a county easement, public right-of-way that predated any private development. I'd learned during my Corps days that easements were like military chain of command. Once established, they trumped everything below them. The HOA had exactly 0 jurisdiction over county property regardless of what their lawyers claimed. Even better, I discovered that HOA bylaws specifically exempt pre-existing structures with demonstrated historical significance from removal requirements. My bridge qualified on both counts, built in 1943, documented in county records, and representing the area's Depression-era heritage. Vivian's legal team had either done sloppy research or deliberately ignored inconvenient facts. Armed with this legal dynamite, I returned to Vivian's next board meeting carrying a briefcase that felt heavier than my Army demolitions kit. This time, I'd invited County Clerk Patricia Santos, a no-nonsense woman who'd been dealing with property disputes since before Vivian learned to spell Connecticut. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, standing in Vivian's pristine living room like David facing Goliath, "I have some interesting news about jurisdiction and legal authority." The silence in that room was so thick you could taste the defeat brewing. Patricia spread the county maps across Vivian's coffee table, her official seal gleaming under the designer lighting. "The bridge in question sits entirely within county easement boundaries," she explained with bureaucratic precision. The HOA's removal vote exceeds their legal authority and is therefore null and void. Vivian's face went through more color changes than a traffic light. That's impossible. We did our research. We followed proper procedures. Your research was incomplete, Patricia replied, her tone carrying the weight of official finality. County easements supersede all private covenants and HOA regulations. This bridge stays exactly where it is. The room's temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees as Vivian's carefully constructed victory crumbled like her brother-in-law's fake assessment. Her fingers drummed against marble with increasing intensity, the sound like bullets tapping against armor. "You may have won this battle, Mr. Donovan," she said through gritted teeth, "but the war is far from over. There are many ways to encourage community cooperation." Standing there watching her squirm, I realized I'd just kicked a hornet's nest, and hornets always swarm back angrier. Vivian's promise of many ways to encourage community cooperation materialized faster than mold in a damp basement. Within a week, she'd switched from frontal assault to guerrilla warfare, launching what I can only describe as death by 1,000 paper cuts. My morning fishing routine, 5:30 a.m. boat engine startup to catch the best bass, suddenly became a noise ordinance violation. My fishing tackle, visible from the water and stored exactly where my grandfather had kept it for 60 years, was now an unsightly storage issue affecting community aesthetics. The harassment campaign rolled out with military precision that would have impressed my old drill sergeant. Vivian had hired a professional HOA enforcement company, headed by a weaselly inspector named Craig Nipple, who showed up every Tuesday with his clipboard and measuring tape like some kind of suburban Gestapo. The sound of his clipboard clicking as he documented imaginary infractions became the soundtrack to my summer mornings. Craig cited me for grass height. Apparently 3.2 inches exceeded the 3-inch maximum by a criminal margin. My dock's weather-beaten cedar planks needed immediate pressure washing to meet water feature maintenance standards. Even my boat cover's forest green color was deemed inconsistent with approved earth tone palette guidelines that nobody had ever mentioned before. Each violation carried a $200 fine plus $50 daily escalation fees that would make a loan shark blush. But Vivian's most insidious weapon was her whisper campaign. At Murphy's Country Store, the post office, even the damn gas station, she'd appear like a well-dressed vulture spreading poison about my hostility to community improvement and how I was dragging down everyone's property values. I'd catch fragments of conversations that stopped when I walked in. Unstable veteran, refuses to cooperate, making life difficult for everyone. The social isolation hit harder than enemy fire ever had. Neighbors who'd waved for years suddenly found their windshields fascinating when I drove past. Even Betty at the country store started avoiding eye contact, though she'd slip me an extra coffee packet with a sympathetic wink when Vivian wasn't looking. That's when I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Walt found me on my dock one evening, nursing a beer and watching the sunset paint the lake gold. "This bullshit reminds me of Saigon," he said, settling his weathered frame into my spare chair. "Bureaucrats in clean uniforms making life hell for people doing honest work." Turns out Vivian had been systematically targeting every old-timer around the lake. Eleanor got cited for her agricultural inappropriateness, the vegetable garden that had fed half the neighborhood for 20 years. Murphy, our local contractor, faced violations for storing his work truck in his own driveway. Walt's beloved bass boat was deemed a maritime eyesore that needed immediate cosmetic upgrades or removal. During my core training, we'd learned about selective enforcement as a psychological warfare tactic used by occupying forces. Target specific individuals to create fear and compliance in the broader population. Vivian was running the same playbook, and I remembered reading about HOA harassment cases where selective enforcement actually invalidated the association's legal authority if you could prove discriminatory patterns. The surveillance discovery came by accident. I'd been noticing the same gray Honda Civic parked near my property at different times, morning, afternoon, evening, always with someone sitting inside. When I finally confronted the driver, cigarette smoke and cheap cologne wafted through his rolled-down window as he fumbled for his license. Private investigator hired by the HOA for community safety assessment and property value protection research. "What exactly are you investigating?" I asked, keeping my voice military calm despite wanting to drag him out through the window. "Just documenting activities that might impact community standards," he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable with direct confrontation. "Nothing personal, just business." but it was about to get very personal. That night, I installed better security cameras around my property, focusing on the dock and bridge area. Call it military paranoia, but something in Vivian's desperate energy suggested she was preparing for escalation beyond legal harassment. I was right. 3 days later, my dock mysteriously developed structural damage overnight, metal support posts showing clean saw marks that even a blind man could identify as sabotage. The security camera caught a figure in white clothing near the dock at 2 a.m., moving with the purposeful gait of someone who thought they were invisible. Walt, with 30 years of military police experience reading body language and criminal behavior, reviewed the footage with me over coffee that tasted like justice brewing. 30 years of watching suspects, and that woman's guilty as sin, he confirmed, pointing at the distinctive stride and posture. Same height, same build, same arrogant way of moving like she owns the world. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. Vivian's desperation reached new heights when she decided to weaponize my military service record against me. 2 weeks after the dock sabotage, she filed a formal complaint with the county about my increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior, complete with cherry-picked testimonies from her Thornfield Estates cronies about my wild accusations and hostile confrontations. The woman had somehow obtained my service records, probably through her ex-husband's corporate connections, and discovered my minor PTSD diagnosis from Iraq deployment. The wellness check ambush arrived on a crisp Thursday morning while I was performing my usual dock maintenance routine. Sheriff's Deputy Maria Santos pulled into my driveway with Vivian trailing behind in her white Tesla like a vulture following a hearse. The deputy's radio crackled with morning dispatch chatter as Vivian launched into her performance, complete with concerned neighbor act and trembling voice. "Officer Santos, we're just so worried about Mr. Donovan," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that appeared magically from her designer purse. "He's been making increasingly paranoid accusations about his neighbors, seems completely isolated from reality. We're concerned he might hurt himself, or someone else." 20 years of military discipline kicked in automatically. I set down my tools, wiped my hands clean, and approached with the calm professionalism that had served me through 3 combat deployments. "Good morning, Deputy. I assume you're here about Ms. Blackwood's harassment campaign?" I produced my organized documentation folder. Every violation notice, every harassing incident, every piece of sabotage evidence, all cross-referenced and chronologically arranged like a military intelligence brief. The security footage of the dock sabotage played on my tablet while Deputy Santos reviewed the evidence with growing interest. "Ma'am," she said, turning to Vivian with the kind of look cops reserve for time wasters, "filing false reports is a misdemeanor in this county. Mr. Donovan appears to have legitimate grievances, and his documentation is thorough and credible. I suggest you reconsider your approach to neighborhood disputes." Vivian's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating predator underneath before she recovered with wounded dignity. "I'm simply trying to protect our community, Deputy. But I understand you have to investigate all reports thoroughly." As soon as the patrol car disappeared down my driveway, Vivian escalated to her nuclear option: property liens. The certified letter arrived 3 days later, thick as a phone book and reeking of legal intimidation. $18,000 in accumulated violation fines, she claimed, with interest and administrative fees compounding daily. Failure to pay within 60 days would trigger foreclosure proceedings against my grandfather's cabin. But while Vivian was playing her legal games, I'd been conducting research that would have made my old intelligence officers proud. A week of deep diving through county records, state archives, and historical documents had revealed something she never saw coming. The story of Lake Thornfield's creation was far more complex than anyone realized, and buried in those dusty files was the key to ending this war permanently. Lake Thornfield wasn't natural, it was artificial, created by the Thornfield Valley Development Company's dam construction project in 1952. When that company went bankrupt in 1978, the dam ownership transferred to the county, then got sold to a private owner in 1981 to settle outstanding debts. The buyer? My grandfather's estate trust, which meant I'd inherited something far more powerful than a fishing cabin. I owned the dam, not just a share, not just access rights, but complete legal ownership of the concrete and steel structure that created Vivian's precious lake. The deed felt like parchment between my fingers as I studied the implications, brittle with age but solid as granite in its legal authority. From my engineering training, I knew that artificial lakes operated under different water rights laws than natural bodies. Property owners bought their lakefront land with assumptions about permanent water access, but no legal guarantees. As dam owner, I controlled water levels completely, and environmental regulations actually protected my right to drain the lake for maintenance purposes. My water rights attorney, Rebecca Sterling, confirmed what I'd suspected during our consultation in her downtown office that smelled like leather-bound law books and decades of legal victories. Mr. Donovan, you hold what we call superior water rights. The dam creates the lake, you own the dam, therefore you control the lake. It's that simple. The environmental angle provided perfect cover. State records showed Lake Thornfield was due for mandatory dewatering inspection under environmental safety regulations, something required every 25 years that hadn't been done since 1998. I could drain that lake for essential maintenance and environmental compliance, and there wasn't a damn thing Vivian or her lawyers could do to stop me. But here's where it got really interesting. Vivian's entire financial empire was leveraged against that lake remaining full. Her $1.8 million resort project was funded through high-interest development loans, with covenants requiring premier lakefront location status. Without water access, property values would plummet 60 to 70%, triggering loan defaults that would collapse her entire investment portfolio. I didn't just hold the trump card, I held the nuclear option. The complete picture of my nuclear option crystallized during a late-night research session in my cabin, surrounded by legal documents and engineering manuals that painted a devastating scenario for Vivian's empire. I didn't just own the dam, I owned exclusive rights to control Lake Thornfield's water levels, backed by 70 years of legal precedent and environmental regulations that made my authority absolutely bulletproof. The 1970s drought cases I'd discovered established ironclad precedent. Dam owners' water management authority superseded all other property interests, including lakefront access rights. When artificial lakes faced environmental stress, the dam owner could drain them partially or completely for maintenance, fish habitat restoration, or infrastructure inspection. The courts had consistently ruled that recreational and residential interests took second place to environmental stewardship and public safety, but the environmental compliance angle was pure gold. State Environmental Agency records confirmed that Lake Thornfield was overdue for mandatory dewatering inspection, a comprehensive structural assessment requiring complete drainage every 25 years. The last inspection happened in 1998, making current compliance 17 years overdue. I could file the required paperwork, drain the lake for essential environmental maintenance, and every environmental lawyer in the state would defend my actions as responsible stewardship. The financial intelligence I'd gathered on Vivian revealed her vulnerability was even greater than I'd imagined. Her lakeside resort project wasn't just an expensive hobby. It was a leveraged bet-the-farm investment funded through multiple high-interest development loans. The loan covenants I'd researched through public financing records required maintaining premier lakefront destination status throughout the development period. Without lake access, her resort would become a muddy crater worth maybe 30 cents on the dollar. Even more devastating, Vivian had borrowed against multiple properties to fund this venture, creating a house of cards that would collapse if any single element failed. Her Greenwich mansion, her Connecticut investment properties, even her precious Tesla were collateral against loans that would become immediately callable if the resort project lost its lakefront status. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Memorial Day weekend was 6 weeks away, exactly when Vivian had scheduled her resort's grand opening extravaganza. She'd already pre-sold vacation packages worth $400,000 for the summer season, with local newspapers running promotional stories about the luxury lakeside destination bringing sophisticated tourism to upstate New York. The media attention meant her failure would be spectacularly public. My consultation with Rebecca Sterling confirmed every legal avenue was secured. The environmental paperwork requires 30 days public notice, she explained, spreading the forms across her conference table like battle plans. File these documents and you'll have unstoppable legal momentum. No court in the state would grant an injunction against required environmental compliance. The engineering solution was elegantly simple. Lake Thornfield's dam system included auxiliary spillway controls that allowed selective drainage targeting specific areas. I could lower the water level 8 to 12 feet, which would strand Vivian's resort and the newest McMansions while maintaining adequate water access for the upstream old-timer properties. Surgical precision. Destroy her investment while protecting my neighbors. The moral calculation had kept me awake for 3 nights running. Draining the lake would affect the entire community, not just Vivian. But as I studied the dam's technical specifications and environmental impact data, I realized this wasn't just revenge, it was genuinely beneficial environmental action. Lower water levels would improve fish spawning habitat, reduce algae blooms that had plagued recent summers, and allow maintenance that would benefit the lake's long-term health. Vivian had spent months trying to destroy something precious to me. Now I held the power to destroy something precious to her, with the added bonus of environmental improvement and legal protection. The irony was perfect. She'd attacked my family legacy using legal technicalities, and I was about to end her financial empire using environmental regulations she'd never bothered to research. Sitting in my grandfather's cabin, surrounded by the evidence of my upcoming victory, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: the satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. Vivian had wanted to play hardball with a military engineer. Now she was about to learn why that was the worst mistake of her privileged life. The paperwork was ready, the legal foundation was solid, the environmental justification was bulletproof. Time to drain her dreams. War requires good soldiers, and I was about to assemble the finest team of local experts this side of the Hudson Valley. My first recruit was Walt Henderson, whose 30 years of military police experience and natural suspicion of authority made him perfect for operational security and intelligence gathering. Eleanor Murphy brought decades of teaching experience that translated into community relations and public messaging. Nobody could spin a story like a retired English teacher who dealt with hostile school boards. Murphy, the contractor, provided technical expertise on dam operations, having worked on similar projects throughout the region. But my secret weapon was Marcus Anderson, the county environmental inspector who owed me a favor from our shared deployment in Afghanistan. Marcus could provide official environmental cover and ensure all bureaucratic requirements were met with military precision. The technical planning session took place in my cabin on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, with engineering manuals and dam schematics spread across my dining table like battle plans. The concrete structure my grandfather had helped build in the 50s was still functionally perfect after 70 years, a testament to Depression-era craftsmanship that modern developers couldn't match. The dam's auxiliary spillway controls would allow me to lower the lake level precisely where I wanted it, targeting Vivian's resort area while maintaining access for upstream properties. The beauty of this system, I explained to my team while tracing the spillway diagrams, is surgical precision. We can drop the water level 8 to 12 feet in the southern basin where all the new development sits, while keeping the northern section at normal levels for the old-timer cabins. The concrete hummed with contained power beneath our feet as we stood on the dam walkway, decades of held-back water thrumming like a sleeping giant waiting for orders. Rebecca Sterling, my water rights attorney, had crafted a legal strategy that was absolutely bulletproof. Environmental impact assessment forms for routine maintenance dewatering would be filed with state and federal agencies, creating unstoppable bureaucratic momentum. Once those official documents entered the government machinery, no private party could halt the process without proving environmental harm, which was impossible since our action would actually improve the lake's ecological health. The government regulations Rebecca had researched became our greatest weapon. Environmental compliance paperwork created legal immunity for actions that might otherwise seem controversial. Every form, every notification, every required study would be filed in perfect bureaucratic order, making our drainage operation not just legal, but officially mandated by state environmental law. Eleanor's public relations campaign positioned our drainage as responsible environmental stewardship rather than personal revenge. Her messaging focused on restoring the lake to natural seasonal levels that would benefit fish spawning, reduce algae blooms, and allow critical infrastructure maintenance. The historical angle presented our action as returning to traditional water management practices that had sustained the lake for generations. "We're not attacking anyone," Eleanor explained during our strategy session, her teacher's instincts for narrative control shining through. "We're protecting our community's environmental heritage from short-sighted development that threatens the lake's long-term health." Her coffee and conspiracy kitchen meetings with sympathetic neighbors created grassroots support for what others might see as destructive action. Walt's intelligence gathering operations revealed that Vivian's resort construction was already behind schedule and over budget, with investors getting increasingly nervous about the project's viability. Financial pressure was making her take desperate measures to secure additional funding, including leveraging properties she couldn't afford to lose. The surveillance rotation Walt established confirmed that she was spending sleepless nights dealing with contractor disputes and cost overruns. Marcus Anderson's official dam safety inspection provided perfect bureaucratic cover for our operation. His environmental agency mandate identified routine maintenance requirements that justified temporary drainage within 60 days, creating legal urgency that Vivian couldn't challenge. The beauty of government regulations was their immunity to private party objections. Once environmental compliance was required, personal convenience became irrelevant. Our psychological warfare phase began with strategic information leaks. Marcus filed official environmental paperwork that created public record trails, letting rumors of possible maintenance issues circulate naturally through the community. Legal documents with official seals arriving at county offices created intimidation factor that money couldn't buy, building pressure on Vivian without revealing our ultimate intentions. The contingency planning covered every possible challenge. Multiple environmental justifications were prepared in case of legal challenges. Sympathetic local reporters were briefed for positive coverage, and financial protections ensured my own property value impacts would be minimized. Most importantly, we planned for complete water-level restoration after the maintenance period, demonstrating good faith environmental stewardship. Memorial Day weekend timing was perfect for maximum psychological impact on Vivian's resort opening. The final preparations included studying dam operation manuals, testing equipment functionality, and installing environmental monitoring systems to document everything. Every action would be photographed and legally justified, creating an unassailable record of responsible environmental management. Coffee and whispered strategies filled Eleanor's kitchen with warmth and determination as we finalized our plans. After months of harassment and legal intimidation, we were finally ready to show Vivian that some battles are won with engineering knowledge rather than expensive lawyers. Vivian's intelligence network was better than I'd given her credit for. Somehow she'd caught wind of my courthouse visits and environmental paperwork filings, though she completely misread their significance. Assuming I was researching property law to defend against her lien threats, she decided to eliminate my trump card before I could play it. Her solution? Hire Rex Hardwick and his crew for emergency dam maintenance that would conveniently disable the spillway controls. The sabotage attempt unfolded like a bad heist movie. At 2:30 a.m. on a moonless Thursday, Rex's crew arrived at the dam with cutting torches and hydraulic tools, planning to damage the spillway mechanism beyond immediate repair. What they didn't count on was Walt's military-grade surveillance operation, complete with night vision cameras and motion sensors that would make the Pentagon jealous. Walt's voice crackled through my radio at 2:45 a.m. Tango down at the dam, 3 subjects with power tools attempting to access spillway controls. The night vision footage was crystal clear, Rex and 2 accomplices cutting through security fencing, carrying equipment specifically designed to disable water management systems. Metal tools clanged against concrete as they worked, their headlamps bobbing like fireflies in panic when Walt and I emerged from the shadows with our own lights blazing. "Just doing my job, buddy," Rex stammered when we caught him red-handed with a cutting torch inches from the spillway control housing. Cigarette smoke and nervous sweat made the night air thick with guilt as he fumbled for explanations that wouldn't hold water in a paper cup. "Your job doesn't include trespassing on county infrastructure and attempting to sabotage water management systems," I replied, keeping my voice military calm while Walt documented everything with his camera. "That's called criminal conspiracy, and it carries federal charges when you mess with environmental infrastructure." The confession came faster than I expected. Rex, faced with potential felony charges and a Purple Heart recipient as witness, cracked like cheap concrete. Vivian had offered him a $10,000 bonus for preventing any dam problems that might interfere with resort operations. She'd even provided detailed diagrams of which systems to disable, proving premeditation and conspiracy. By morning, I had criminal charges filed for property damage, conspiracy, and attempted destruction of environmental infrastructure. The evidence package included video footage, witness statements, financial records of Vivian's payments to Rex, and documented proof of deliberate sabotage planning. Sheriff's Department took the case seriously. Infrastructure attacks carried serious federal implications, especially when they involved water management systems. But Vivian wasn't finished. Faced with criminal exposure and sensing her empire crumbling, she launched a preemptive media campaign to frame herself as the victim of my unstable neighbor vendetta. Social media posts flooded local Facebook groups with sympathy-seeking narratives about harassment and persecution. She even hosted an emergency community meeting at the country club, complete with catered refreshments and professional presentation materials. The community split deepened into open warfare. Property lines became battle lines, with lakefront residents forced to choose sides between old money environmental stewardship and new money development priorities. Real estate agents began warning potential buyers about ongoing neighborhood disputes affecting property values. Family barbecues and community events became impossible as neighbors avoided each other like opposing armies during a ceasefire. Vivian's desperation peaked when she approached me directly with a bribery attempt. The confrontation happened at Murphy's Country Store, where she cornered me between the fishing tackle and the beef jerky with an envelope thick enough to choke a horse. $50,000 cash, she offered, to resolve neighborhood tensions and restore community harmony. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd bought her way out of every problem. "What's yours?" I activated my phone's recording app before responding. "Some things aren't for sale, especially not to people who try to destroy them first. Keep your dirty money, Vivian. You're going to need every penny for legal fees." Her political pressure campaign was equally desperate and equally ineffective. Phone calls to county commissioners, state environmental officials, and anyone with regulatory authority fell on deaf ears when officials confirmed that dam maintenance was legally required and environmentally beneficial. Government bureaucrats don't respond well to pressure from private citizens trying to interfere with official environmental compliance. The resort investor crisis began when her financial backers learned about potential lake drainage through public legal filings. Panicked phone calls and emergency meetings filled Vivian's calendar as investors demanded explanations and guarantees she couldn't provide. Bank officials began questioning the viability of lakefront development projects with uncertain water access, creating financial pressure that made her increasingly erratic. Meanwhile, I maintained strategic patience, allowing legal and bureaucratic processes to build unstoppable momentum. Spring mornings carried the scent of victory and fresh possibility across the still full lake as environmental permits moved through official channels. Old-timers rallied around our environmental stewardship message while Vivian exhausted herself fighting unwinnable battles against government regulations and criminal charges. The trap was set, baited, and ready. All that remained was watching her walk into it. Vivian's last-ditch legal challenge came through the most expensive environmental law firm money could buy, a Manhattan outfit that charged more per hour than most people made in a week. Her emergency court motion to stop the dam maintenance read like a desperate woman's fever dream, claiming environmental damage, community harm, and economic devastation if I proceeded with the legally mandated drainage. The court hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning in the county courthouse that smelled like old wood and faded justice. Judge Patricia Kellerman, a no-nonsense woman who'd been presiding over property disputes since before Vivian discovered upstate New York, reviewed every piece of environmental documentation with the thoroughness of a military inspection. My water rights attorney had prepared a legal brief thick enough to stop bullets, complete with 70 years of precedent and environmental regulations that made my authority absolutely clear. "Your Honor," Vivian's lawyer argued with the kind of desperation that comes with billable hours and impossible clients, "this drainage would constitute environmental vandalism of a pristine recreational ecosystem." Judge Kellerman's response was swift and brutal. "Counselor, the defendant's documentation clearly establishes his legal authority over water management. Furthermore, the state environmental agency has mandated this maintenance as overdue compliance. This court will not interfere with legally required environmental stewardship based on speculative economic concerns." The judicial rebuke was perfect. Injunction denied, maintenance must proceed as scheduled, and Vivian was responsible for $40,000 in legal fees she couldn't afford. Her face went through more color changes than a mood ring as her lawyer packed up his briefcase with the defeated efficiency of someone billing for a lost cause. But defeat only made Vivian more dangerous. Her character assassination campaign against me intensified with social media accounts posting anonymous complaints about my dangerous mental state and paranoid behavior. She somehow obtained my service medical records through her ex-husband's corporate connections, spreading whispers about PTSD and veteran instability that made my blood boil with righteous fury. The anonymous tip strategy revealed just how far she'd fallen. EPA complaints about suspicious chemical storage near the dam, Fish and Wildlife reports about illegal habitat modification, even Homeland Security tips about potential infrastructure terrorism flooded government offices with false allegations. Every agency that investigated confirmed my activities were legal and proper, but the harassment wasted taxpayer resources and painted Vivian as an increasingly unhinged nuisance. My media strategy countered her smear campaign with scientific credibility and environmental responsibility. The local environmental reporter Jake Morrison from the County Herald had covered water issues for 20 years and immediately recognized the ecological benefits of periodic dewatering. His interview with me focused on fish habitat restoration, algae reduction, and the scientific necessity of infrastructure maintenance. People don't understand that artificial lakes require active management, I explained during our interview in my cabin, surrounded by engineering manuals and environmental studies. This drainage will expose spawning beds that haven't seen sunlight in decades, improve water quality, and allow repairs that will benefit the entire ecosystem. Meanwhile, Vivian's resort construction had become a desperate race against time. 24-hour shifts, overtime costs, and corner cutting created code violations and worker safety complaints that attracted unwanted official attention. Her remaining cash reserves disappeared into construction overruns while she tried to complete the project before my drainage deadline. The insurance discovery was the final nail in her financial coffin. Business insurance policies specifically excluded coverage for environmental events and water level changes, leaving her $18 million in investment completely exposed. Mortgage covenant violations triggered by lakefront status loss would accelerate loan payments she couldn't possibly make, creating a domino effect that would collapse her entire financial empire within months. Community polarization reached its peak as Memorial Day weekend approached. Neighborhood communication had completely broken down, with property owners choosing sides like civilians in a civil war. Even the morning bird song seemed muted, as if nature itself held its breath waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Vivian's final desperation attempt involved recruiting outside environmental groups to oppose the drainage, but the irony was perfect. Actual environmentalists supported periodic dewatering for habitat restoration and ecosystem health. Her last resort was considering physical confrontation to prevent spillway operation, but her visible mental deterioration made even her allies nervous about association. I completed all legal and technical requirements with military precision. Environmental monitoring equipment was installed and calibrated, safety protocols were filed with county authorities, and professional photographers were hired to document the entire process. Local news stations received alerts about a significant environmental restoration story happening Memorial Day weekend. The calm before the storm was almost peaceful. My grandfather's cabin felt like a command center as I reviewed final preparations, surrounded by legal documents that granted me absolute authority over Vivian's fate. Every permit was approved, every regulation satisfied, every contingency planned for. Memorial Day weekend would bring the largest crowd to Lake Thornfield in years. Perfect timing for Vivian's resort's soft opening to coincide with her empire's public destruction. The psychological preparation was complete. I'd steeled myself for irreversible action that would end this war permanently. The nuclear option was ready to deploy. Memorial Day weekend dawned with perfect weather that drew the largest crowd to Lake Thornfield in decades. Irony has a sense of timing. Vivian's resort soft opening was scheduled for the exact same day I planned to drain her dreams into muddy reality. By 7:30 a.m., families were already setting up picnic blankets and launching boats, completely unaware they were about to witness environmental history and financial carnage rolled into one spectacular morning. I arrived at the dam at precisely 8:00 a.m. with my technical team and legal observers, carrying the authority of 70 years of water rights and every environmental regulation in New York State. Marcus Anderson, the county environmental inspector, stood beside me with his official clipboard and state-issued safety vest, while Deputy Santos provided law enforcement presence. 3 news crews had positioned themselves strategically after Jake Morrison's tip about the significant environmental story unfolding. Morning mist rose from the doomed lake surface like ghosts of future memories as I approached the spillway controls. The concrete structure hummed with contained power beneath my feet, decades of accumulated water pressure waiting for my command. Every gauge, every valve, every safety mechanism had been tested and certified, ready for the most satisfying engineering project of my career. That's when Vivian arrived like a general leading her final charge. Her white Tesla screeched into the dam parking area, followed by 3 SUVs carrying resort investors, construction crews, and 2 hired security guards who looked uncomfortable about their assignment. Her designer heels clicked against concrete as she marched toward us with the desperate energy of someone watching their empire crumble in real time. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her composed facade completely shattered in front of cameras, community members, and the financial backers who'd trusted her with millions. "You're destroying everything. This is my life's work." The public meltdown was even more spectacular than I'd hoped. Vivian's perfectly styled hair came undone as she gestured wildly, her white linen outfit wrinkled from sleepless nights dealing with construction disasters and loan covenant violations. The woman who'd terrorized our community for months was reduced to emotional breakdown before an audience of hundreds. Deputy Santos stepped forward with the calm authority that comes from dealing with desperate people. "Ma'am, Mr. Donovan has full legal authority for this maintenance operation. State environmental regulations require immediate compliance. You need to step back and let him proceed." Marcus Anderson held up his official inspection order, the state seal gleaming under morning sunlight like a badge of environmental justice. "This dewatering operation is mandated by New York State environmental compliance regulations. Any interference constitutes obstruction of official environmental protection activities." Vivian's hired security team took one look at the law enforcement presence and official documentation before stepping aside. Even expensive muscle won't fight county sheriffs and state environmental inspectors over a wealthy woman's temper tantrum. The news cameras captured every moment as I placed my hand on the spillway control wheel. 150 neighbors, investors, and curious onlookers watched as 70 years of water rights and environmental stewardship came together in a single mechanical action. The crowd held its collective breath as metal groaned and water began its controlled escape from Vivian's artificial paradise. The first hour was magic. Water levels dropped 2 feet, exposing previously hidden shoreline and revealing decades of natural artifacts buried beneath Vivian's luxury facade. Her resort's boat dock began showing pilings as expensive watercraft listed awkwardly in the retreating water. The sound of water flowing backward through time carried the satisfaction of justice finally served. Vivian's investors watched their lakefront investment transform into worthless mudflat before their eyes. Loan officers and financial advisors huddled in emergency consultation as property values evaporated faster than morning mist. The resort opening day became a disaster documentary, with catering trucks and promotional banners looking absurd against the backdrop of draining prosperity. By noon, the lake level had dropped 6 feet, completely stranding Vivian's resort and the newest McMansions while maintaining adequate water for upstream old-timer properties. Fish habitats emerged blinking into sunlight for the first time in decades, and water quality improvement was immediately visible as sediment settled and clarity improved. When Jake Morrison asked for my statement on camera, I delivered the line I'd been practicing for weeks. This isn't about victory over any individual. It's about being a responsible steward of the environment my grandfather helped create. Some people build legacies that last generations. Others just build resentment that destroys communities. The technical explanation flowed naturally. Calm, professional description of environmental benefits, fish spawning habitat restoration, and infrastructure maintenance that would improve the lake's long-term health. Every word was legally bulletproof and environmentally justified, making me look like a conservation hero rather than someone settling personal scores. The community reaction was immediate and transformative. Old-timers felt vindicated in their environmental concerns, while many newer residents realized they'd been manipulated by Vivian's agenda. Property revelation came as lower water levels exposed natural beauty hidden for decades, and neighbors began talking across factional lines for the first time in months. Vivian's complete collapse was total and public. Deputy Santos had to restrain her from attempting to physically attack the spillway controls as her financial empire crumbled in real time before cameras and community witnesses. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my grandfather's restored stone bridge watching the most spectacular sunrise Lake Thornfield has seen in decades. The water sparkles with crystal clarity that would make a jeweler weep, teeming with fish populations that have increased 40% since the environmental restoration. State environmental agencies now use our project as the gold standard for artificial lake management, hosting quarterly workshops that bring conservation experts from across the Northeast. Vivian's complete downfall was swift and absolute. The resort project collapsed into bankruptcy within weeks of the drainage, taking her entire financial empire down like a house of cards in a hurricane. Forced to sell her lakefront mansion at 50 cents on the dollar to pay crushing debts, she fled back to Connecticut with her tail between her legs and a criminal conviction for conspiracy and property damage on her record. The local business community treats her name like a toxic waste warning. Nobody wants to be associated with the woman who tried to destroy a Purple Heart veteran's family legacy. The community transformation has been nothing short of miraculous. Former enemies now work side by side on lake conservation projects, unified by shared environmental goals and mutual respect for responsible stewardship. Property values have increased 15 to 20% thanks to improved water quality and enhanced recreational opportunities. Our annual Lake Stewardship Day has become the highlight of the summer calendar, drawing families from neighboring counties to celebrate environmental responsibility and community cooperation. Democratic HOA elections swept out Vivian's cronies and installed leadership focused on environmental protection rather than aesthetic control. The new board's first act was officially recognizing pre-existing structures like my bridge as community heritage assets, deserving protection and celebration. Walt Henderson now serves as security liaison. Eleanor Murphy heads the Community Relations Committee, and Marcus Anderson provides environmental consulting that keeps us ahead of all regulatory requirements. My personal healing has been as dramatic as the lake's restoration. Successfully defending my family legacy while improving the environment gave me purpose I hadn't felt since Sarah's death. The County Environmental Advisory Committee elected me as chairman, channeling my engineering expertise and military leadership into projects that benefit the entire region. Most importantly, I've found companionship again. Eleanor's sister Janet moved up from Albany after her retirement, and we've discovered that shared values and mutual respect make excellent foundations for new relationships. The practical knowledge sharing has become a regional phenomenon. My guide for property owners facing HOA overreach gets downloaded thousands of times monthly, while the water rights workshops I conduct with state agencies have empowered communities across New York to assert their environmental protection rights. Government regulations, properly understood and strategically applied, become powerful weapons against petty tyrants who mistake authority for wisdom. The Lake Thornfield Environmental Education Center, funded by legal settlement money from Vivian's criminal case, now offers scholarships for environmental engineering students and hosts research projects on sustainable water management. Children's laughter echoes across restored shallows as they discover tadpoles and minnows in habitats that hadn't existed for decades, reminding me daily why this fight was worth every sleepless night and legal battle. The annual Thornfield Environmental Days Festival attracts visitors statewide, supporting local businesses while showcasing responsible development that respects natural systems. Documentary filmmakers have created a feature about our water management project that's being used in environmental law courses nationwide, and the legal precedent we established protects dam owners' environmental authority against private interference. My grandnephew proposed to his girlfriend on the restored bridge last month, continuing a family tradition that Vivian tried to destroy but only made stronger. 3 generations of proposals, 3 generations of love, and now the promise of 3 more generations who'll watch sunrise paint this perfect water gold and understand that some victories are worth more than money. They're worth everything. Every neighborhood has a Vivian, someone who mistakes control for leadership, money for merit, and intimidation for authority. But every community also has the tools to hold petty tyrants accountable, if you know where to look and how to use them responsibly. Knowledge is power, and power belongs to people willing to use it for something bigger than themselves. Drop a comment telling me about your HOA nightmare. I read every single one, and your story might be next. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see more stories about ordinary people who refuse to be bullied and found extraordinary ways to fight back using nothing but determination, research, and respect for the law. As I finish writing this, morning fish are jumping and mist rises from crystal clear water that 3 generations of my family have called home. Some legacies are built with concrete and steel. Others are built with love, respect, and the courage to defend what matters most.